Hello. Tonight we begin with something truly peculiar. That medieval mindset which still quietly dominates our lives. So before you relax, please take a moment to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're from. What time is it now? Now dim the lights. Let's embark together on tonight's slightly absurd journey. You might think the 9-to-5 work schedule began with the Industrial Revolution, meticulously designed by Victorian gentlemen in fancy suits, to calculate exactly when employees would die from exhaustion. But no, this system actually originated with monks. In the Middle Ages, monks were the only ones who could schedule their days precisely, and they were relentless in making everyone else live by their rules. Their lives depended on a series of bells: morning bells, noon bells, prayer bells, meal bells, and bells for regretting becoming a monk. This wasn't just a spiritual journey, but more a sacred alarm clock system, with an added dose of guilt. Monks' days were divided into minors called Catholic hours: matins, lauds, midday prayer, vespers, compline, and night prayer. They sound more like rejected Harry Potter spells than prayer times. Whenever the bells tolled, the monks would halt their tasks to chant, kneel, or stare blankly into endless time. This wasn't about efficiency, but obedience. You didn't need to think. You needed to synchronize with God, the monastery, and the bell hours keeper. Of course, there was always that one monk who loved striking the bells 2 minutes early, just to watch the whole world descend into chaos. Over time, the outside world caught this schedule. Towns began scheduling market hours by church bells. Guilds used chimes to mark work shifts. Eventually, factories copied the system, just removed prayer and added screaming managers. When the Industrial Revolution arrived, someone decided to take the monk's way of life, strip out the religion, add administrative paperwork. Thus the modern workday was born. At least the monks had quiet surroundings, wine, and robes that doubled as pajamas. And you have fluorescent lights and Slack notifications. Even your lunch break traces back to a medieval timetable. Back then, monks would pause work during their time of the flesh moments for prayer and sneaking snacks. Your lunch break today is an unquestioned link in corporate process. So next time, when your alarm clocks ring at 7 and sharp, and you drag your weary body toward another day's toil, remember you are not modern. You're actually a medieval person, just without the chanting and absolution. 9-to-5 didn't evolve. It escaped the monastery, put on a suit, learned to say we'll discuss this later. If you hear someone whisper "God bless you" when you sneeze in public, congratulations. You've just participated in humanity's oldest and most foolish conditioned reflex. This isn't politeness, but medieval panic that never received notice of germ theory. In the 6th century AD, when plague swept across Europe, a sneeze was no trivial matter. It heralded impending doom. If you sneezed once, they assumed you were infected. If twice, they began dividing your estate. The logic was simple: when you sneeze, your soul attempted to escape through your nostrils, and lurking demons might seize it mid-air. In 590 AD, Pope Gregory I resolved to imbue each sneeze with divine power. He commanded believers to respond with "God bless you," transforming a bodily function into collective ritual. Each blessing became an urgent prayer, a miniature exorcism ritual for hay fever sufferers. This blessing spread faster than the plague itself. Soon villages across Europe fell into a collective cycle of exhaustion from constant blessings. No one could sneeze in peace. Imagine this soundscape: church bells, roosters crowing, plus 40 villagers shouting "God bless you" whenever someone inhaled pollen. This practice proved effective not medically, but socially. Offering a blessing became proof you weren't a heartless monster. Otherwise, neighbors would die unblessed. Refusing to bless bordered on witchcraft. This superstition took deep root. Even after centuries of scientific progress, sanitation reforms, and vaccine development, we still bless the sneeze, or as we did in 1348. Though no one believes souls escape through sneezes anymore, the nasal explosion still startles. In truth, The only real escape from a sneeze is 100,000 bacterial droplets hurtling at 100 mph toward your face, and no one blesses you for that. So next time someone sneezes, and you instinctively murmur "bless you," understand you're reenacting a medieval ritual designed to expel Satan from the sinuses. This isn't politeness, but participation in a millennia-old collective superstition still regarded as good manners today. Next time you twirl pasta or politely spear chicken with your fork, remember in medieval Europe, these simple actions could brand you a heretic. Yes, that harmless little fork in your cutlery drawer was once deemed Satan's instrument. Introduced to Western Europe by Byzantine nobles in the 11th century, they dined elegantly with delicate gold forks to avoid soiling their hands. Logical? Wrong. The church immediately fell into panic. Clergy declared Ficus blasphemy against God, for the Almighty had already granted humans the perfect eating tool fingers. To dare use metal instead of flesh and blood for eating, the very notion was tantamount to sacrilege. When a Byzantine princess married into the Venetian royal family, her gold fork triggered a collective breakdown among local priests. When she soon died of the plague, clergy triumphantly declared she dared to eat with a gleaming fork instead of God minus heaven fingers. This was divine retribution. For centuries, Europeans continued eating with their hands like cavemen in fancy clothes. Even Renaissance nobles hesitated to use forks, as they defied nature. Knives and spoons were acceptable, a stab, a scoop, both aligned with biblical teachings. Only the fork exuded an unnatural aura. Ironically, people began eyeing from food poisoning. Dirty fingers proved insufficiently hygienic. Yet even the most severe dysentery couldn't refute the church's logic. God created two hands, therefore use your hands. Until the 17th century, when Italy's fashion elite deemed the fork elegant. Only then did the rest of Europe follow suit. The British, as usual, joined last, insisting forks were effeminate, until a prominent figure used one publicly. So next time use it at the table, gracefully twirling your fork. Remember, you're practicing an act once deemed morally questionable. The medieval church fiercely opposed hygiene standards, refined manners, and table etiquette, only to ultimately lose the battle. This poetic conclusion means every dinner, when knives and forks are used, represents a small victory of common sense over organized superstition, or as a priest might put it, temptation served on silverware. If you find modern bachelor parties chaotic, imagine the sword minus wielding version. In the Middle Ages, marriage was not yet a contract of love or shared Netflix accounts, but a purely economic transaction. Yet even then, men couldn't resist indulging in one last night of debauchery before signing their life contracts. Thus was born the medieval stag night, the primal version of the bachelor party. Knights gathered in taverns or banquet halls, drinking ale until helmets became too heavy to wear, betting their war horses, swearing loud oaths of eternal loyalty to freedom, usually lasting only 8 hours. These celebrations were meant to be a tribute to the groom stepping into a life of responsibility. In reality, they were merely an excuse to see how far a man could drink before falling into the moat. The stag symbolized base and wild instincts in medieval terms, the remorse of drunkenness. Guests raised their cups to praise the groom's courage in entering marriage, while secretly betting how long he'd last in matrimony. Challenges to duel were routinely issued, and at least one gentleman would mistake the bride's cousin for a tavern maid. The church naturally detested such feasts. Priests called them feasts of sin, and fairly so, for it was true. They warned that premarital drunkenness invited curses. Knights, of course, saw this as a challenge. Over time, the tradition trickled down from nobility to commoners. Castles gave way to taverns. Armor was traded for leather shoes. But the essence remained unchanged: feasting and debauchery. For tomorrow you shall be bound by law. Even the post-Linus hangover rituals remain identical: the hangover, the awkward silences, the vow to never speak of it again. The only difference between past and present is, medieval men lacked smartphones to document the evidence. So when you see a modern groom staggering out of a bar, plastic crown askew and regret etched across his face. You are witnessing history. The tradition never changed. Only the swords, the plague, and that moral authority named Sir Geoffrey who once attempted to juggle a flaming torch while shouting declarations of love are missing. The bachelor party hasn't evolved. It's merely downgraded from chainmail to matching T- shirts. And somewhere, medieval monks still pray for them all. When someone passes now, we instinctively lead on black, a symbol of respect, solemnity, even eternity. But the truth is, it's just medieval fashion run amok. Mourning colors once varied by region. Ancient Romans wore white to funerals, purity symbolized by cleanliness, better reflecting grief under the blazing sun. Medieval Europeans, however, declared no. Let's RO be both oppressive and fashionable. Black dye was costly then. Only the wealthy could afford proper grief. Peasants couldn't buy sorrow made of cloth. They wore clean clothes, statistics show. They had no clothes to wear at all. The nobility elevated mourning to ritual. Wrapped in black wool cloaks and veils, they wailed dramatically in the streets. Grief, like everything else, must become a performance. The church rejoiced. Black symbolized humility before God. More cleverly, it made clerical attire appear pious rather than slovenly. Over time, mourning attire spread to every social stratum. After all, nothing proclaimed penance more effectively than garments that absorbed both heat and despair. Of the 14th century, black funerals had become the ultimate symbol of power. Kings departed in black. Widows shrouded themselves in veils for life. Entire courts collectively mourned for years on end. Centuries later, Queen Victoria revived the custom by wearing mourning attire for 40 years, setting a record for emotional hostage staking. Of course, black eventually shed its religious connotations to become a fixed symbol. Today, when we attend funerals, we wear black like accountants mistakenly filing eternal documents, simply because the Middle Ages decreed mourning required a dress code. Ironically, the rest of the world never followed suit. In most of Asia, mourners still wear white, symbolizing purity. In Africa, vibrant colors celebrate a life of abundance. Meanwhile, Westerners insist on bidding farewell to the deceased in attire resembling a collective tax audit. So next time you wear black to a funeral, remember this is not an expression of eternal reverence. It merely follows 1,000-year-old fashion rule invented by medieval elites who sought to appear sanctimonious through their attire. And all fashioned wrens share the same essence. They're never for the deceased. They're to prove one's superiority in expressing grief with elegance. Of the handshake, this sacred gesture symbolizing modern civility, professionalism, and the occasional exchange of germs, seems polite, friendly, even profoundly human. Yet its origins, like most medieval customs, are shrouded in mystery. Medieval people didn't greet each other with handshakes, but to signal "do not kill me." Medieval Europe was rife with suspicion. Everyone carried weapons. Everyone was in debt, and everyone's cousin was plotting a coup. Thus, when two met, they extended their right hands to prove no dagger was concealed. The handshake emerged later, a slightly theatrical wave, intended to confirm no blade lurked within the sleeve. This was less a greeting than a mutual weapons inspection. Knights, merchants, even kings employed this rite, though typically performed with the sword hand, trembling from feigning trust in others. Of course, left-handers, that eternally suspect minority, were deemed untrustworthy simply for wearing their swords on the opposite side. Medieval logic, as flawless as ever. By the 16th century, the handshake evolved into the formal greeting among gentlemen, replacing bows and that ever-minus awkward silence. It became a symbol of equality, a declaration we are both free men, though capable of stabbing each other. We choose not to. Centuries later, the handshake became a professional ritual. Merchants transformed it from a survival tactic into social etiquette. This gesture, once used to confirm no blade was concealed, now seals multi-million-dollar deals frankly. It's merely a modern version of the jeweler's handshake, only slower, based and with lawyers present. Even the pandemic couldn't end it. Doctors warned us to stop shaking hands. Yet humanity collectively responded better to risk infection than appear impolite. This mindset is truly medieval. So next time someone grips your hand tightly in a meeting, remember their true meaning. I come here with goodwill. A handshake isn't a symbol of trust. It's a fossil from an era when trust could get you stabbed. And observing how business operates today, perhaps it hasn't fundamentally changed much. If you've ever been told to chew with your mouth closed, remain silent before meals, or stop licking your knife, congratulations. You're practicing ancient survival skills invented by medieval people. They grew weary of dying over dinner, and thus created these etiquettes. Understand this. Table manners didn't originate from a pursuit of elegance, but from the horrifying dining scenes of the Middle Ages. Imagine a long wooden table, covered in greasy grooves, those made by moldy bread plates. Everyone shared one knife, one bowl, and a pair of fingers. You had no personal utensils, only hope, not even a napkin. Standard etiquette was to wipe greasy hands on the nearest dog or neighbor. Monks complained of guests swiping oily fingers on sacred texts. Of course, rules against spitting at the table already existed, meaning someone had learned this prohibition the hard way. By the 13th century, disgust finally crystallized into formal etiquette. Manuals of etiquette began circulating. Works like the Manual of the Civilized Man instructed: do not scratch your body while eating, do not blow your nose on the tablecloth, do not inspect your teeth with a knife. These were genuine teachings, proving such behaviors were not taken for granted. High society swiftly transformed hygiene into a hierarchy. Commoners could eat with their hands. The nobility flaunted their superiority through etiquette. Social joust fought with spoons instead of swords. Ultimately, etiquette elevated into moral code. The church proclaimed that table manners reflected the purity of one's soul. After all, nothing demonstrated sanctity more than sipping soup elegantly while still believing in witchcraft. By the Renaissance, eating had evolved from a survival necessity into a performance art. The purpose of feasting was no longer to fill bellies, but to prove one was not a barbarian. It was Instagram culture with trenches. Yet those medieval etiquettes persist: no burping, no fussing over food, no loud talking. You follow these not to appear polite, but because in another timeline, disobeying might have given you dysentery. You might assume weekends are a modern invention, the fruit of union victories, productivity science, or enlightened employers valuing rest. No, they originated with medieval peasants who needed brief work stoppages to drink, pray, and occasionally recall the sun's form. The medieval world had no concept of weekends. People labored until physical collapse. Then they worked a little more. But the church, in its infinite benevolence, decided people should rest occasionally, not for health, of course, but to attend Mass and avoid committing sins unsupervised. The church calendar was stuffed with feast days, sometimes over 100 days a year. These religious holidays honored obscure saints, the Virgin Mary, and occasionally commemorations that sounded like excuses for parties. Each feast meant a day off, free food, and the legal right to drink before noon. Nobles complained of peasants having too many holidays. One medieval bishop lamented the common folk work one day and rest three, perhaps the first recorded instance of a manager complaining about employee inefficiency. As centuries passed, the Reformation trimmed redundant celebrations. Dozens of excessively joyous saints' days were outright abolished. Puritans particularly detested public leisure time, so they imposed stricter rules. Sunday became the mandatory day of rest. Thus Sunday evolved into modern slack time. After the Industrial Revolution, factory owners noticed overworked laborers made frequent mistakes in coding self-injury. They had to reinstate rest days. Later, it was discovered, energized workers were less prone to accidents, like falling into machinery. So Saturday afternoons were added as rest time. By the 20th century, the weekend was formally established: one day for God, one day for recovering from hangovers. So next time you collapse into bed on Saturday night, remember this tradition stems from medieval religion, polished by Protestant guilt, and perfected by capitalism's Monday recovery plan. The weekend is no benevolent gift. but a sacred compromise between sin, survival, and scheduling. And we still thank God for it today. When you slip on a wedding ring today, you're not just declaring eternal love, but reenacting a medieval property exchange ritual. In the Middle Ages, marriage had nothing to do with romance, but was an economic transaction cloaked in vows. Love always arrived after the paperwork, often followed by regret and joint land stewardship. The ring is not a symbol of fidelity, but a deed of ownership. Its origins trace back to ancient Egypt, where the circles symbolized eternity. This concept spread through Rome, where men gifted rings to women as a claim of possession. By the time it reached medieval Europe, the church discovered this practice was perfect PR, both a symbol of loyalty and a legal shackle. Rings are worn on the left ring finger because people believe the vein of love ran directly to the heart. This is pure nonsense. Medieval science also believed headaches stemmed from demonic possession. Leeches held medical degrees. Yet this myth persists today, mainly because its poetic expressions efficiently proves gold's precious value. Weddings themselves held little religious significance before church intervention. Previously, marriage required only mutual vows before witnesses, sealed with a handshake, to be legally binding. The church spotted a business opportunity. Soon only unions blessed by clergy were deemed valid. Wedding rings became essential props. But don't be fooled by appearances. Early wedding rings were rarely worn by men. For centuries, the ring remained a 1-way symbol signifying a woman's possession, not an equal partnership. Not until the 20th century did husbands begin wearing wedding rings. As soldiers in WWI'd on them to commemorate wives as signify betrothal even overseas. Today, wedding rings are ubiquitous. This metallic band crowned with meanings of love, trust, and eternity until someone leaves it behind in the bathroom sink. When you gaze upon that golden circle, remember its true essence: neither eternal romance, nor a sacred blessing, but a medieval merger agreement that has endured through every cultural shift since the Crusades. What you wear is not a token of love, but a more elegantly packaged 9-century-old contract. The dwellings of ordinary people in the Middle Ages, like modern studio apartments, seem like Versailles walls were optional. Doors were mere formalities. Privacy was a myth. Most lived crammed into single rooms, sharing space with family, livestock, and the ghosts haunting the rafters. The medieval concept of personal space boiled down to just don't step on that chicken, until textiles arrived, that miraculous technology shielding sight without walls. Curtains began as utilitarian objects. Heavy drapes blocked wind and insects, and shielded against neighbors' prying eyes. But they soon evolved into social statements. Nobles hung embroidered tapestries around their beds, not merely for warmth, but to proclaim their dignity. These bed curtains became portable bedrooms. In halls filled with the clamor of servants, the snores of relatives, and the comings and goings of minstrels, they created an illusion of privacy. For the well-to-do, the splendor of these bed curtains could serve as stage backdrops. Some even featured dinner layers, beyond which even spouses could not peer. At the time, guests often slept in the same room, sometimes sharing the same bed. For changing clothes, prayer, or weeping, the curtains offered the only barrier. Commoners eventually followed suit, dividing rooms with common cloth. When blankets hung between man and beast, that sense of separation carried a touch of luxury. Curtains became the noise-canceling headphones of the Middle Ages, mostly symbolic, with limited effect. Over time, this concept spread widely, and privacy became a societal pursuit. By the Renaissance, curtains were everywhere, draped over beds, hung on walls, covering windows, even wrapping around self-esteem. The wealthier one was, the heavier the drapery. Centuries later, we remain the same. When night falls, we draw the curtains, as if fleeing the Inquisition's judgment, rather than the light from a neighbor's porch. We buy blackout curtains, thermal curtains, privacy-cut curtains. Proof we've upgraded our fabrics, yet never shed our paranoia. So next time you draw the curtains before sleep, Remember you're reenacting a medieval ritual against judgment, gossip, and cold drafts. The only difference neighbors probably aren't peeping. When you hear God Save the King, you might think of national pride, a solemn anthem sung by loyal citizens. But in the Middle Ages, it had nothing to do with patriotism. It was an exorcism. This prayer was originally a protective charm, like a spiritual insurance policy for monarchs after all, at tournaments. Their lifespans rivaled the shelf life of a ham sandwich. Medieval people firmly believed king's word divinely appointed, yet also convinced Satan suffered from severe boundary issues. Every rebellion, plague, or crop failure was blamed on demonic interference. Thus God Save the King wasn't a cheer, but a crisis management tactic. Whenever a monarch fell ill or someone sneezed near the throne, the church would organize public exorcism prayers. The entire square would chant in unison God Save the King, as if reciting a spell for in their hearts. It truly was a spell. The logic went something like this: if enough commoners shouted loudly enough, God might hear this cry drowning out the dying man's wails. The outcome was predictable. Medieval monarchs still met their ends, most often by poison, war, or rival kings' blades. Yet the chanting persisted, for superstition remains humanity's unchanging political tradition. By the 16th century, this invocation had become ritualized, appearing in church services, royal processions, and any occasion demanding feigned loyalty. Shouting it aloud proved you were not plotting treason, at least not today, in an era when criticizing the monarchy could mean decapitation. God Save the King was less a declaration of faith than a means of self-preservation. The song version emerged in the 18th century, when Britain elevated this medieval emergency incantation to national anthem status. The original prayer, "Let no devil usurp the throne," gradually transformed into the plea, "Let no Frenchman take his place." Centuries later, people still sing it with hands over hearts, pretending to celebrate national unity, unaware it's essentially holy water for crowdfunding. Next time you hear 10,000 voices in a stadium chanting God Save the King, remember you are witnessing a medieval necromantic and ritual, only now it's televised live. The concept of a day of rest may seem humane, even progressive, but the medieval church established it not to ensure work-life balance, but to guarantee believers attended Mass. In early medieval Europe, the church controlled everything: your calendar, your conscience, and when necessary, even your afterlife. Thus they designated Sunday as a sacred day of rest, not because peasants needed respite, but because priests needed an audience. If someone was found working on Sunday, it wasn't a labor law violation, but a sacrilege. This was no minor personal infraction, but an offense inviting eternal damnation. Imagine explaining this in the confessional: "Father, forgive me, I weeded during evening prayers." The rules were clear: no plowing, weaving, or blacksmithing. No buying or selling unless the church was peddling indulgences. That, of course, is a different matter entirely. A miraculous exemption indeed. Sermons warned the faithful those who defy the Lord's day shall face divine retribution. Medieval Europe was obsessed with tales of horror. Legends abound. One tells of a man baking bread on Sunday, whose dough transformed into a swarm of snakes. Another recounts a farmer sharpening his scythe, only to drop dead on the spot. The moral was clear: God alone decides your weekend leisure. Naturally, enforcement varied wildly. Lords and nobles could labor at with divine law, like modern policy, never applied to those in power. Yet commoners working to survive faced hellish threats. As the industrial age dawned, Sunday prohibitions were rediscovered, repackaging it as family time. Employers call it a moral code. Workers call it barely sufficient. Despite millennia of progress, the logic remains medieval: your rest is unturned by virtue, but decreed by someone holier, richer, or stronger. Today, most who rest on Sundays spend it doing unpaid labor, laundry errands, or worrying about Monday. Though not sacred, it's become tradition. So next time guilt nags as you check emails on Sunday, relax, you're not defying God. You're merely upholding a medieval tradition working when theoretically forbidden. If your boss emails to reprimand you, tell him your dough just turned into a snake. When someone addresses you as sir or madame, it sounds polite, even respectful. But in the Middle Ages, these titles weren't expressions of respect. They were acknowledgments that the other held the legal right to execute you. Titles were the linguistic armor of feudal Europe. Society was essentially a human pyramid, the king at the apex, peasants at the base, everyone else crushed in the middle layers. The title Sir arrived from the old French abbreviation Sire of Seine. You was actually an admission that the other controlled your land, livelihood, and very spine. This was no optional courtesy. Failing to bow or use a title when encountering nobility was not mere social discourtesy, but a grave offense. 14th-century etiquette manuals explicitly warned those of low status must address superiors with reverence, or face punishment. Such punishment, in the Middle Ages, meant public humiliation and minor, corporal punishment. Women had their own exclusive address, madame, derived from madam, literally meaning my lady. This was no term of endearment, but a declaration of ownership. It proclaimed to all, this woman belongs to a social class above yours, typically because she was the property of a man of higher standing. As times changed, titles gradually softened. Nobility lost its privileges. Your Excellency and Madame trickled down the hierarchy, ultimately becoming hollow formalities. Today we use them for cashiers, customers, and people blocking grocery aisles. These small linguistic gestures pay homage to a social order technically defunct, yet emotionally enduring. Americans use these titles to appear polite. Britons employ them to signal superiority. In the South, the meaning of sir and ma'am shifts with intonation. They can convey sincere respect, or transform into verbal slaps. This is linguistic evolution in action, feudal submission repackaged as customer service. So next time someone calls you sir or ma'am, remember you're merely being treated like a medieval landlord. You haven't earned authority. You've merely inherited vocabulary. When you use these titles on others, it's not out of politeness, but a more elegant reenactment of feudalism with more generous tips. If you've ever waited in line for a permit, signed a triplicate form, or sent emails for confirmation and follow minus up, these experiences all trace back to the Middle Ages. Bureaucracy, humanity's favorite way of putting on airs while accomplishing nothing, is a product of the Middle Ages. Back then, kings couldn't rule their kingdoms alone. They needed literate people to record tax rolls, land ownership, and recent execution lists. Thus emerged the first scribes, robed figures wielding quills and ink, possessing the divine power to turn trivial matters into eternal delays. The Church perfected this system. Every tithe, crime confession, and miracle demanded triple documentation, stamped and filed. Medieval monasteries were the original offices, candlelit cubicles crammed with unpaid interns called novices. Their handwriting was exquisite. Their morale was abysmal. By the 12th century, the royal administration joined the fray. The King of England employed legions of scribes to record every ox, every fence, and every soul in the realm. Thus were born the cathedral ledger's history's first databases. Though lacking in search functionality, their original purpose was to bring order to the kingdom, yet they mostly added to the chaos. Soon, governments across Europe followed suit. Everything that existed had to be recorded on forms. Property disputes spawned scrolls longer than marriage contracts. Births, deaths, and taxes demanded signatures, seals, and witnesses. Losing a document was nearly tantamount to treason. The true genius of medieval bureaucracy lay in its capacity for self-replication. Every law demanded documentation. Every record required paperwork. Every scribe needed another scribe to verify the first's handwriting. This formed a perfect self-sustaining ecosystem, a perpetual motion machine powered entirely by frustration. Fast forward to the modern era. Everything remains unchanged. Parchment has been replaced by PDFs. Quill pens have become keyboards. Stamps have been supplanted by electronic signatures. But the essence remains unchanged. you still must seek permission from letters no one truly understands. So next time you're trapped in an endless phone transfer, or forced to fill out the same information 5 times on a form, take comfort in this: you are perpetuating a 1,000-year tradition. Medieval kings had scrolls. You have spreadsheets. Both are equally meaningless, but at least your spreadsheet has a submit button. If you think rage culture was born on Twitter, clearly you've never met a medieval villager with nothing better to do than control the church bells. The entire medieval society was built on moral panic. No news tickers, no trending topics, just rumors spread by priests and the occasional suspicious minus-looking goat. Someone spotted a comet and immediately blamed the local widow for the calamity. In the blink of an eye, half the town was engulfed in flames. Society in that era didn't need evidence. It needed scapegoats. Drought, witchcraft, plague, raid that wouldn't rise, surely the work of witches. This was the universal explanation for every calamity. If no witches could be found, heretics or foreigners became perfect substitute. The church fueled this frenzy with industrial minus-scale efficiency. Panic-boosted church attendance if people could be convinced plagues stemmed from sin, earthquakes from heresy. They'd increase their tithes. Call it medieval divine protection crowdfunding. The Inquisition toured the land purifying corruption. In reality, they used coercive interrogation to extract confessions of dancing with the devil. Public hysteria became a spectacle. Witch trials turned into community events. People brought snacks to watch. Those cheering at the execution block would beg for forgiveness the next morning. Sin and spectacle found perfect balance. Frankly, little has changed to this day. We've merely replaced the gallows with comment sections, and torches with WM-5. When someone errs, the mob descends. By sunset, only digital shouts and moral superiority remain, yet no substantive solutions. The rhythm persists, only the spelling has sharpened. Medieval panic maintained order through fear. Modern panic sustains engagement through algorithms. Both make people claim righteousness while accomplishing nothing. This tradition persists stubbornly, surviving plagues, the printing press, and the Enlightenment. Whenever someone gasps, "You actually posted that," it flourishes anew. Renaissance Rome should have been a sacred beating heart. Saints prayed here. Pilgrims wept here. Divine light bathed every street corner. But peel away the gilded facade of marble and frescoes, and a starkly different scene emerges. Desire burned as fiercely as faith. The bells summoning worshippers to mass echoed equally over a city steeped in sin. By the early 16th century, this holy city had become a paradox. Pilgrims came seeking redemption, yet the streets reeked of perfume and wine. Taverns around Piazza Navona were filled with priests who'd clearly forgotten their vows of chastity, perhaps even sobriety. Nobles paraded through the streets in velvet doublets. Prostitutes leaned on balconies, giggling softly, as church bells echoed in their ears. Even confession, meant to purify souls, had devolved into a lewd ritual whispered behind confessional screens. Looking around, temptation was sheltered by the very institutions meant to curb sin. Monks indulged in alchemy, spending more time concocting aphrodisiacs than copying scriptures. Nuns concealed love letters between the pages of psalm books. Bishops hosted feasts that would make pagan emperors blush. Roasted peacocks, dancing girls, wine flowing endlessly. And at the very heart of it all stood the Vatican, self-proclaimed bastion of morality. By day, the papal palace cloaked itself in virtue, but after dark, corridors flickered with candlelight and laughter. Servants swore they saw mistresses slipping through secret doors. Rumors swirled of cardinals fathering countless illegitimate children. The city of saints, Rome, had transformed into the Las Vegas of the Renaissance. If Las Vegas peddled indulgences while quoting scripture, no one truly felt shocked. Hypocrisy had been elevated to an art form. Priests preached abstinence at dawn, visited mistresses by afternoon, then commissioned mysterious Madonna paintings bearing uncanny resemblance to their lovers by night. It was an era where the sacred was worn like jewels, glittering brilliantly in the light, yet dimmed in shadow. Rome called itself the Eternal City, But at the height of the Renaissance, the Vatican resembled less a monastery than a royal court teeming with dramatic conflicts, personal desires and scandals, worthy of a soap opera. The Pope was not merely God's representative on earth, but more often Italy's wealthiest power brokers, and sometimes its most corrupt figures. This phenomenon was especially pronounced during the reigns of the so-Linus called Pope playboys, who blended sacred duties with personal desires, as naturally as water and wine blend together. Take Pope Alexander I, born Rodrigo Borgia, whose very name became a silk-wrapped symbol of sin. He openly acknowledged at least 8 illegitimate sons. As for those born in secret, Rome had long lost count. His mistress, Vonda de Catanei, resided openly in a palace near the Vatican. Another lover, Julia Fairs, was dubbed the Pope's concubine by half of Europe. While he preached virtue, his son Cesare Borgia was carving a bloody path across Italy, and his daughter Lucretia was rumored to poison her lovers at banquets. The Borgias never hid their vices. They wore velvet robes embroidered with the family crest, openly flaunting their sins. Yet spiritual flexibility was not Alexander's exclusive trait. Julius II, nicknamed the Warrior Pope, spent more time clad in armor than in vestments, commanding armies rather than presiding over prayers. He was renowned for his soldierly profanity, and commissioned art like a monarch. Michelangelo's frescoes in the Sistine Chapel were ironically funded by this pope, who fathered at least one illegitimate child. Meanwhile, Leo X, the 10th Medici Pope, treated the papacy as Florence's bank account, hosting banquets so lavish they made Roman nobles blush. For these popes, indulgences were not merely church doctrine, but a way of life. Their banquets gathered cardinals, court entertainers, poets, and painters, to revel in gold, silver, and gossip. The Vatican treasury did not run dry from the Crusades, but was drained by carnival masks and mistresses. Yet the faithful continued to donate, firmly believing the Pope was the moral anchor of the world. Yet Rome's streets knew the truth. Whenever a new Pope was elected, the people cared not for his sanctity, but wagered on his mistresses. The church had become a sinful theatre draped in brocade and incense. Behind every sacred decree beats a heart pulsing with desire, ambition, and raw humanity. If the Pope was the king of sin, then Rome's noble women are the queens of sin. They are not street walkers, but glittering elites, so minus called courtesan e honeste, or honest courtesans. This honesty is as open as a wolf's lust for sheep. These women could recite the Bible in one breath, and chant love poems the next, dressed in robes that could bankrupt a cardinal, adorned with jewels that had already ruined their families. The most notorious among them was Imperio Coniati I, known as Imperial Ia the goddess. Her name alone inspired trepidation among nobles. In salons suffused with perfume and scandal, she entertained cardinals, artists, and ambassadors. She was not merely beautiful, but also wise, sipping Venetian wine. She could dismantle a bishop's treatise on virtue into shreds. When she died, the entire city mourned as if for royalty. Even clergy sent wreaths, pretending it was Christian charity, not remembrance. Next came Turi Edi Erigan, a poet, philosopher, rumored to have had affairs with half the Vatican secretaries. She wrote in defense of women's right to pleasure, making priests choke on communion wafers. Her mansion became a gathering place for artists and thinkers. Theological debates invariably veered back to the subject of desire. These women navigated Rome's treacherous social currents like seasoned diplomats. In a city ruled by men who preached purity while indulging in pleasure, the mistresses became the most cunning players. They knew every secret, every affair, every promise whispered in candlelit confessionals. A mistress's word could destroy a career or ignite feuds among popes. They were not merely tolerated, but indispensable. When diplomacy failed, Rome dispatched not soldiers, but smiles. Noble women were under strict surveillance, while courtesans moved freely, serving as unofficial envoys of charm, between powdered lips and jeweled corsts. They controlled the true intelligence networks of the Renaissance. Ironically, these sinners often displayed greater wit and dignity, and those who claimed moral superiority. They mastered the system that oppressed them, elevated to art, when priests hunted them in secret, and poets immortalized them in verse. Rome's courtesans proved power doesn't always wear a bishop's mitre, sometimes it drapes in silk veils, while priests and popes made headlines for extravagance. Renaissance Roman noble women cultivated their own scandals, more discreet, yet equally daring. They dwelt in marble palaces gilded with virtue, yet their hearts and letters burned with passionate fire. In their world, marriage was a political contract, not a romantic union. When a duchess found herself chained to a dull husband twice her age, natural relief came in the form of a confessor, one who listened attentively, and occasionally stayed the night. Victoria Colonna was the legend whispered about. This celebrated poet became a noble widow after her husband fell in battle. Her piety made her a darling of Rome's religious circles, yet her friendship with Michelangelo sparked unceasing gossip. Their correspondence brimmed with spiritual yearning and poetic tenderness. Walking the razor's edge between sacred love and forbidden desire, the church called it platonic friendship. The Romans were blunt. Others made no pretense. The women of the Unforgettable families. The renown rivaled the popes. They ensnared cardinals, artists, and ambassadors with equal measure of beauty and power. Their salons became stages for passion. Poetry, music, and philosophy served merely as veils for seduction. Affairs unfolded through coded letters, saint portraits concealing love notes, and occasional pilgrimages to lovers' villas beyond the city walls. Yet caution was the key to survival. A nobleman's debauchery might be excused as youthful vigor. A woman's indiscretions, however, risked exile or harsher punishment. Yet this did not deter them. Many noble women asked the due a lot of holy and fallen lives, daily confessions guarded against accumulating sin. In public, they wore modest attire, yet beneath their cloaks lay embroidered corsets. Behind every Madonna painting adorning the palace walls lied tales of guilt and desire. While the Vatican proclaimed purity, Roman noblewomen chanted their lust in sonnets. They knew the art of survival, sin in silence. Gilded confessions, trace minus free. In the city where men willed power openly, women learned to wield power in private. Their whispers in the dark often rang louder than sermons from the pulpit. Art became Rome's most respectable disguise for desire, under the sacred light of divine inspiration. Painters and sculptors filled churches with visions more fleshly than heavenly. The Renaissance reignited the art of the human form. Artists embraced it with reckless passion, often blurring the line between beauty and profanity. Take Rome's darling Raphael, for example. His frescoes radiate serene tranquility. Yet behind this calm lies a notoriously licentious man. His muse, Lavinia, daughter of a baker, whose exquisite curves inspired half the Madonnas he painted. She became his obsession, his secret lover, and some even claimed she was the true model for the Virgin Mary. When Raphael died young, rumors swirled his death was not from malaria, but from exhaustion after nights of feverish artistic pursuit. Michelangelo, meanwhile, wrestled not only with marble, but also with guilt. The saints on the dome of the Sistine Chapel adhered to biblical descriptions, yet no one failed to notice how he sculpted each muscled curve with love. Church officials complained the saints appeared too human. Admirers called it sacred anatomy. Critics denounced it as erotic art. This artist wrestled in prayer, carving, and agony, swaying between piety and the undeniable beauty of flesh. Then the true rebels emerged. Caravaggio stands as their leader. His paintings radiate divine light, yet are saturated with earthly sin. His models were often street miners, hired prostitutes and thieves. The raw sensuality was painted onto the faces of saints and martyrs. In his eyes, holiness and sin were inseparable twins. His Judith beheading Holofernes brims with violent and erotic tension, leaving viewers unsure whether to cross themselves or avert their gaze. Behind every sacred commission lay a seed of blasphemous inspiration. Artists hired by the church to praise God simultaneously glorified the flesh the church warned against. Their studios resembled confessionals, only swapping rosaries for pigments and flesh. Renaissance Rome. Art was never mere ornament, but embodied temptation. Each brushstroke gambled between redemption and scandal, as frescoes bloomed across city walls. Rumors spread God's greatest masterpiece was not the soul, but the naked human fall. To glimpse the true soul of Renaissance Rome, not in marble statues or papal decrees, but that beating heart of sinful revelry carnival was the perfect moment. For several days each year, Rome cast off moral shackles, reclaiming primal desires. Masks conceal true faces. Wine replaces sermons. The divide between clergy and commoners dissolves in flickering torchlight. Even the church loosens its chains during revelry. Cardinals attend masquerades to observe the youth, which often means chasing dancers until dawn. Monks wander drunkenly through the streets, muttering the intoxication of spiced wine, quoting scripture with the conviction of one who hasn't opened the Bible in ages. It said even the Pope, sheltered within the Vatican's high walls, leans out onto his balcony to watch with keen interest the city's annual descent into disorderly revelry. The streets overflow with symbolism and sin floats bearing allegories of virtue triumphing over vice. Though most spectators cheer for vice prostitutes disguised as nuns, nuns disguised as prostitute. Both seem thoroughly enjoying themselves. The following week, confessionals overflow. Priests solemnly shake their heads, meticulously recording who did what with whom, and the minutiae of these confessions. They became Rome's unofficial gossip network. One penitent might confess an affair with a married cardinal, only to have her sins repeated by a snickering servant moments later. In the eternal city, secrets always had a short lifespan. One monk even quipped in Rome, "The Holy Spirit descends not as a dove, but as a rumor." This contradiction was a spectacle and both punished and celebrated. Carnival processions passed beneath frescoes of the Last Judgment, where hands showered roses upon the crowd. By dawn the next day, they clasped rosaries. Devout believers attributed sin to human frailty, as if weakness were this city's most fervent pursuit. After the revelry ended, Rome washed its face, reminisce ground with sanctity. Priests proclaimed virtue aloud. Nobles returned to matrimony. Incense drifted through the streets, replacing sweat and wine. Yet memories linger behind every saint's procession hides a hangover. Beneath every whispered confession lies a knowing smile. For Romans know well forgiveness is but a cheap transaction, and the pleasure of sin is priceless. Without mentioning the Borgia family, any discussion of Renaissance Rome's moral decay remains incomplete. This family elevated vice to an art of governance. While common Romans debated lust and greed, the Borgias patented them. Rodrigo Borgia, later Pope Alexander I ruled not as a shepherd, but as a godfather to Italy's criminal syndicates. Except his syndicate also sold indulgences. His Vatican was a stage for depravity. Witnesses describe banquets where prostitutes dined naked. Halls draped in silk creaked of scandal. One infamous chestnut banquet was particularly shocking. 50 dancers twirled, while cardinals tossed roasted chestnuts onto the floor. Guests scrolled to pick them up. A spectacle of shameless debauchery. Whether the tales were exaggerated mattered little. The Romans believed them. That was enough. Rodrigo's children were the true testament to his dual legacy. Cesare Borgia, the Pope's favorite son, possessed grace and extraordinary beauty, yet was cold and ruthless. His efficiency in eliminating rivals, as swift as his father's issuance of pardons. His sister Lucretia became legendary, accused of incest, poisoning, and seduction. Though most were enemy propaganda, yet her mastery over men husbands lovers. Even the Pope made her Europe's most dangerous woman. The Borgias blurred sacred and sensual boundaries. Private depravity seeped into public policy. Cardinals were appointed through bribery. Sins were redeemed with gold. Marital alliances were sealed by bedchamber pleasures rather than written contracts. Though Rome had seen corrupt popes before, it had never encountered one who treated the papacy as a family business. Yet the Borgias defended themselves by arguing. They merely brought into the open what others did in secret. While other families cloaked their extravagance in Latin sermons, the Borgias gilded and perfumed theirs. Blatantly obvious, they transformed the Vatican into a brothel and a battlefield. Ever minus changing. When Alexander V finally passed away after a feast, Rome breathed a sigh of relief, yet held reverence. He was indeed a sinner, but an unforgettable one. His reign brought shame upon the church. His name was spat upon, yet his legend lives on. In Renaissance Rome, the Borgia family proved an eternal truth in the right hands. Sin can become ultimate power, despite their mouths full of condemnation and sermons. The church in Renaissance Rome was not a victim of sin, but its enabler. The hierarchy thundered condemnations of lust from the pulpit, yet behind marble walls, the clink of coins rang louder than conscience. Every indulgence sold, every absolution granted, was a cog in the forgiveness economy. With generous offerings, you could revel with your mistress, and confess the next morning, to depart spiritually purified. This was not hypocrisy, but business. After all, sin was a reliable source of income. The Vatican treasury swelled with penitents, those who sinned knowingly, yet craved absolution to repeat their transgressions. In a sense, the Church has transformed desire into a subscription service: sin, confess, pay, repeat. Even the printing of indulgences has become a thriving industry. Monks who should be illuminating Bibles now busy themselves verifying receipts. Cardinals own vineyards and operate banking enterprises, maintaining lavish estates with legions of servants and harems of mistresses. One bishop fathered numerous illegitimate children. Locals mockingly dubbed his palace the house of the Lord and his large family. Yet when these rulers presided over the Inquisition's moral trials, they condemned commoners under charges bordering on Vatican tradition itself. As calls for reform grew louder, when monks whispered that the church had lost its soul, they were silenced or exiled. Accusing God's representatives of acting like merchants was a perilous act indeed. Yet rumors of the Pope's unrestrained indulgence and decadence spread far faster than any papal decree. When priests warned the faithful to resist temptation, even devout believers began to sneer they had witnessed too many sermons abruptly cut short in taverns. This irony was nothing short of miraculous. The more the Church preached condemnation of sin, the more it depended on sin to survive. Without lust, greed, and guilt, half of Rome and the Vatican's economic system would collapse overnight. Some attempted internal reform. A few upright monks exposed corruption but faced indifference, transfers, or mysterious illnesses. More accepted Rome's sanctity as merely theoretical. As one weary priest wrote in his diary, "We do not dwell in the city of God, but in a city where God pretends not to see." Thus, beneath thousands of candles and painted icons, the Church continued its sacred charade, half prayer, half indulgence. Entirely human. Late Renaissance, Rome had perfected the art of sanctified pretense. Every street corner held a shrine. Every household harbored a confessor. Every sinner possessed exquisitely crafted excuses. Virtue was no longer a state of the soul, but a garment, a fine cloth. This city proudly wore a robe of silk and pearls, just enough incense to mask the stench of hypocrisy. Men entered churches with prayer books in one hand and love letters tucked in the other. Women crossed themselves during Mass, yet secretly exchanged glances with lovers to rows away. Painters inscribed their muses' faces into angelic portraits. The Pope commissions altarpieces to atone for the sins of the previous night's feasts. In Rome, everyone is an actor, and this theater is sacred. The wise understand the rules of the game. You need not truly be virtuous. Simply feign piety, weep during confession, give generously to the poor. When hearing of sin, they listen with pious rapture. Reputation is this city's currency. People guard their reputations far more diligently than their souls. If secret transgressions are merely human frailties, if exposed, they invite divine wrath. Even morality itself has become a fashionable trinket. Relics traded like jewels. pilgrimages transformed into social banquets, charity turned into Renaissance-era PR tactics. Nobles sponsor new churches not for absolution, but for prestige. A mural of the Last Judgment washes away family shame more effectively than 1,000 prayers. Vatican calls it faith. Rome calls it strategy. Yet beneath this veneer of hypocrisy lies a near-minus poetic contradiction. This city, corrupt as it is, buzzes with vitality, passion and hypocrisy intertwined in perfect rhythm, giving birth to art, architecture, and thought that still captivate the world today. Whenever sins whispered in darkness, masterpieces were born in light. Ultimately, Renaissance Rome was not purely evil. It revealed human nature, and proclaimed to the world even the holiest men harbor desires, and the most devout women harbor dreams. Beauty can flourish from corrupt soil. The eternal city stands unshaken through scandal, because it never sought perfection, but craved immortality. In this pursuit, even sin becomes sacred. You were not born to fame, but emerge from dust and horse sweat. The stable was your cradle. The clatter of hooves was your lullaby. In the Roman world, charioteers did not come from noble blood, but from chains. They were slaves, prisoners of war, or freedmen poorer in coins than in scars. But none of that mattered, for in the arena, Maximus, as long as he crossed the finish line alive, a slave could become a god. From the moment you learned to walk, you raced alongside horses. They were your only teachers, impatient, fierce, and merciless. The trainer's harsh commands, whips falling like rain, revealed the truth every boy dreads to hear before the crowd remembers your name. The sand will have swallowed your blood, but you paid no heed, for the hunger you carry is sharper than your fear. Each dawn begins before daybreak, shoveling manure, brushing manes, hauling water, until your arms tremble. When the trainer isn't watching, you slip into the empty track. The arena's silence seems to stare at you. You imagine the stands packed with thousands of Romans, cheering or jeering, betting everything on your life. What sustains you is pride, not faith, pride, and that dream in those blazing minutes. All Rome will see you. The Colosseum is the beating heart of the empire, more powerful than any temple, more thunderous than the Senate's debates. The roar of 200,000 spectators pierces the marble stands. 7 laps around the track. Men bellow. Women fainted. Fortunes shifted in an instant. No other stage in the world could bear such frenzy and glory. Deep into the night, you tossed and turned, unable to sleep. In the stables, you stared at the flickering shadows cast by the oil lamp on the wall. Far away, the nobles slept soundly in their villas. But here, amidst the scent of high-end sweat, heroes are born. You know not if you'll die beneath a warhorse's hoofs, or ride the storm to conquer it. But one thing you know for certain: one day, they will shout your name, not as a slave, not as a servant, but as master of the arena, charioteer who commands the storm. The stable is your world's searing heat, deafening roar. One mistake means death. You pledge your loyalty to Rome's factional teams. Each squad as fierce as a legion. The blue, green, red, and white factions ignite the empire's passion more fiercely than political wars. Every Roman chooses a side, from tavern slaves to toga-linus-clad senators. The arena is not merely entertainment, but a religion, and you are about to become its priest. You start as a stable boy, shadowing giants, scrubbing horses until your hands blister, feeding them grain laced with wine, learning to read their lines like soldiers read the enemy. These are no ordinary beasts. They are warriors of the arena, warriors beneath armor, Spanish stallions, Nubian mares, Cappadocian steeds, priceless treasures that ignite imperial rivalries. Sacred yet untamed, danger breeds iron discipline. Rival factions sabotage in the shadows, loosening stirrups, severing reins, luring with poisoned bait. One mishap could end a career or a life. You toss and turn. One hand grips a dagger, the other rests on the reins. To guard your steed is to guard your future. Stable master Fakinus rules the stables with an iron whip, teaching you trust is weakness, hesitation is death. He slaps your shoulder if your horse does not fear you. Young man, the crowd will not respect you, yet fear alone cannot command. You must earn the horse's loyalty. When the chariot roars forward, let their heartbeat rise and fall with yours. This bond is your only armor. As night falls, whispered prayers echo through the stables. Charioteer est raced elmusnums upon the horses' foreheads, invoking Neptune, god of horses and seas. Others offer libations to Fortuna, goddess of luck. The skill alone is never enough. A snapped axle. A loosened rein. A heartbeat too slow before the crowd's gas. Your body will be trampled into the sand, yet you endure, bearing scorching heat, sweat, and eternal peril. For each lap around the arena promises an eternity more intoxicating than freedom, and you choose to burn in the stables until the gods notice your blaze. The first chariot ride is not a race, but a battle against terror. The chariot is far lighter than it appears, a fragile frame of wooden leather, supported only by wheels as thin as blades. The slightest misstep, the horse's faintest stumble, and you'll be dragged to death before the crowd can shout your name. The trainer calls it training. You call it survival. Each sunrise means training. You learn to brace your body against the chariot's jolts. The reins not tethered to your palms, but wrapped around your waist only so you can steer with your entire body. Yet if you slip and fall, you'll be dragged into mincemeat. This is the first and cruelest lesson. Mastery and death share the same knot. War horses are both partners and executioners. You memorize every snort, every twitch, every tremor. For horses, one mind. This is the ultimate goal. If one stumbles, all follow. If one bolts, the entire team perishes. You learn to whisper soothing words, curse to spur them on, and pray with them, the fire and fear churning in their eyes. Reflect your own trembling heart. You do not master them, you become them. When you falter, the trainer shouts curses, whips crack like lightning. AIY roars shake the heavens. A half minus deaf, half minus mad veteran tells you a true charioteer never blinks in the clash. You'll see splintered wood, spurting blood, shattered skulls. He says, but if you blink, boy, you'll miss your chance to live. He was right. To simulate the arena, they throw you into mock races, dust swirling, roars shaking the earth, chaos surging like a tide. Opponents slam into your chariot's wheels, trying to shatter them. You learn to wield the whip not just on your warhorse, but on other drivers striking their arms or cheeks. There are no rules in training, because there are no rules in the arena. Survival is the only lesson. At dusk, your muscles roar, your hands bleed, your heart pounds like a war drum, but the pain grows numb, replaced by something cold, a strange calm. You finally understand fear is useless. The sand knows no life or death, only remembers those who leave their mark. That night you slept among the horses, your fingers still clutching imaginary raindrops. Thunder roars in your dreams, hoofs thunder, wheels thunder. The crowd shouts the name you swore would be yours. When you first stepped into the arena, Maximus, you held your breath. You trembled. That roar alone could suffocate life. 200,000 Romans roared like a surging tide. Cheers rolled and echoed between the stone tiers. Trumpets blared. Banners fluttered. The air thick with sweat, dust, and the scent of roasting meat. This was not merely a contest. It was a fluid religious ritual. The Roman gods watched. Every gambler, thief, senator, and slave in the empire gazed. You step into the starting gate, 8 chariots, like arrows drawn taut, lined up at the starting zone. War horses bellow wildly, hot breath puffing from their nostrils, of scraping the sand. You whisper the horses' names like a prayer, Aquila, Nero, Pallas, Flame. Simultaneously, you tighten the reins tied around your waist. Across the track, opposing factions glare at each other. Today the green faction holds the advantage, and your blue faction desperately needs a victory. The gamblers have already decided who lives and who dies. You need only prove them wrong. The referee tosses the cloth. After a heartbeat minus like silence, chaos erupts suddenly. The gates slam open. 8 chariots burst forth, like liberated gods. Sand swirls through the air. Wheels screech. You lean into the turn. Your life hangs onto spinning wooden wheels. The first bend becomes a battlefield. Drivers lash their rivals. War horses bray. The stands boil with bloodthirsty shouts. The bone minus shaking thud of enemy chariots smashing into your wheel hubs. That a soul tamed to shatter you. You silently counted the laps, steering your chariot closer to the spinning central barrier ray shield flanked by statues of the sea god and dolphins. As you swept past, they were mere inches away. Salty fountain water splashed your arms. 1 lap complete. 6 more to go. The crowd's roar became a beat. Each cheer booms like a war drum in your chest. You feel 1,000 gazes. These strangers, love and hate hinge on a single turn. In that instant, you finally understand why people willingly gamble their lives on this madness. Death no longer terrifies you. Instead, it stirs your soul. Crossing the finish line, you can't tell if you've won or merely survived. Sand clings to your face like ashes. Your hands tremble from the sheer force of your grip. Yet above this chaos, one thing remains crystal clear. The crowd is chanting. Perhaps not loud enough, but you hear it. It's your name. And this is only the beginning. Victory in the arena is intoxicating. Louder than thunder. Sweeter than wine. When you win, the crowd's roar swallows you whole. Women toss garlands. Gamblers weep with joy. And even the emperor himself might nod his approval. You'll return to the stables like a triumphant general. Your warhorse steaming with sweat and pride. For slave or freedman, no glory in Rome surpasses this scene. An afternoon's earnings match a soldier's 10 years' pay. And victory brings endless gifts. Fame, gold, passion. Sponsors line up. Politicians vie for your favor. Poets carve your name on wax tablets. The whole city whispers of your skill, your luck, your legendary charm. Even noble women weary of laudable husbands and banquet obligations secretly slipped you love letters. To Romans, you transcended mortal men, becoming flesh minus and minus blood legend. Yet the higher you climbed, the sharper the blades were honed. Envy was the arena's second language. Opponents laid hidden traps. Supporters set fire to fallen champions. The crowd cheering for you today will curse your name tomorrow. You learn to smile cautiously. Sleep comes fitfully. Glory has its scent. So does betrayal. Your prize buys you a master's body. Yet you cannot escape death threat. Freemen may compete under their true names. Many rush to this fate, only to be strangled in the downpour, or trampled by war horses. The fortunate turn statues. Most end as shattered remains. Bodies buried in nameless graves beyond the city walls. Each lap is a wager with the gods, and gods seldom honor their promises twice. Yet all the gold and peace pales beside standing before the crowd, your victorious hand raised high, laurel crown pressed to your hair. You gaze upon the marble stands, seeing those nobles who once treated you like chaff, feeling their jealousy burn like sunlight. In these stolen seconds, you are neither slave nor mortal, you are Rome's very pulse. As you leave the track, still trembling from the speed, knowing tomorrow may end it all, and as you groom the warhorse, brush away the dust, you whisper the oath every carrier tears, where's may I die swiftly, but die with a bang. Rome's heart beats for color, not for emperors or legions. Blue versus green, red versus white, these are not merely racing teams. They are tribes, cults, armies of passion. They divide neighborhoods. They overturn reason. The city's allegiance is painted in pigment. One might forgive an insult to one's mother, but never an offense against one's faction. The charioteer clad in blue wears that color as armor. To the faithful, you are a hero. To the greens, an enemy. Your name is scrawled on tavern walls. Ballads sing of your exploits. Fights break out in your honor. When you traverse the marketplace, mothers point you out to their sons. Yet you learn to lower your cloak when walking in certain parts of the city. Adoration can swiftly turn to assassination. These factions are far from sporting events. They are political struggles. The Senate sponsors teams. The emperor favors specific camps. When the race descends into bloody carnage, riots erupt. The Colosseum follows its own rules of war and diplomacy. A broken will can ignite street battles. A disputed victory can burn entire neighborhoods. When the Greens accuse you of bribing officials, the whole city boils over. By nightfall, torches light the square. The Tiber runs red with gang blood. Even the emperor fears these factions. They're no ordinary spectators, but Rome's second army. Charioteers like you hold the power to quell or ignite conflict. After one winning streak, the emperor personally invited you to a palace banquet, not out of admiration, but out of caution. He needed to ensure your fame would serve the throne, not threaten it. You smiled and bowed, raised your cup in toast, pretending not to notice the hilt of the emperor's god's sword. But amidst this turmoil, one face haunted your thoughts, your green minus-clad rival, the charioteer named Felix. Swift as the wind, fierce and fearless. The crowd called him the Serpent. Each of your clashes was extraordinary, a true battle for life and death. Standing face to face at the starting line, you both knew that day only one would leave the arena alive. Brilliant colors, roaring cheers, dazzling glory, all but blood and illusion. Rome never cherished its heroes, only devoured them. As long as the masses craved danger, the arena would never be absent. A single collision, one corpse, one shift of colors. The arena from the stands is a painting of splendor. The arena from the chariot is a slaughterhouse. Death comes swift, loud, and brutal. A broken wheel, a panicked warhorse, is enough to end it all. The Romans even coined a word for it, naufragium, meaning shipwreck. For the crash scene resembled a maritime disaster, wooden beams shattered like waves, bodies hurled into the air, screams drowned by the roar of the crowd. At 16, you witnessed the tragedy for the first time. The charioteer head misjudged the spiral curve. The wheel scraped the barrier, shattering instantly. The chariot spun out of control. The horses bolted in terror. The reins dragged the driver along. His body rolled across the sand like a broken doll. You smelled the blood before you saw it. The crowd erupted in reverie. Not horrid death was their most fervent finish line. Each race was a gamble with fate. You learned to read the warning signs, the horse's slight tremors at the starting gate, the wobble of an opponent's wheel, the moment the reins snapped taut. You train yourself to react faster than thought, to steer by instinct when reason freezes. The arena punishes hesitation. Good charioteers die quickly. Great charioteers learn to make death their ally. Near the final turning pillar, collisions are especially brutal. Drivers jostle for the inside lane where victor is whole, and the nest of calamity. You raced it against the curve, feeling the marble road scrape against the axles. The slightest deviation means losing the race. Coming too close and you join the wreckage. There is no middle ground, only glory or ruin. When collisions erupt behind you, screams are often drowned by the thunder of hooves. You never look back. To survive, you must be ruthless. Compassion belongs to poets and priests, not to warriors racing against the gods. You remind yourself every collision is an offering to Poseidon, god of horses. You pray in secret that misfortune never comes. Yet every charioteer knows deep down the rope of fortune will fray. One day, you will feel it snap with your own hands. And when that moment comes, the arena's roar will not cease. The cheering crowds will not disperse. Rome's wheels will still grind onward. Its thirst for blood, like its greed for speed, knows no end. Death lurks perpetually around the bend, yet fate dwells at the opposite end. For the few who survive, chariot racing is a shortcut to riches, a leap from slavery to wealth. Rome worships victors with frenzied devotion. Yet CRUC, IFIES the defeated with equal fervor. You began as a slave, but each victory transformed you into something more precious, a master of your own destiny. Your spoils grew, faster than the crowd could chant your name. Silver pouches, laurel wreaths, fine robes, and golden cups, trophies once reserved for generals, now all yours. First you bought your freedom, then acquired a mansion, then owned a steed of your own. The men who once spat at your feet now bow when you enter the tavern. Senators nod to you in the forum, pretending to forget the slave brand on your skin. You smile, for you know full well. Women flock to you, some for love, most for legend. Courtesans, noble widows, even priestess seek you for prayer. Your fame transforms all you touch into luxury, feasting until dawn. Your name echoes in drunken toasts. You spend money like water, for the gods granted you swiftness, but not immortality. Yet the higher you climb, the thinner the air grows. Friends become sycophants. Admirers turn to thieves. You finally understand Rome does not love you. It is obsessed with your myth, the man who cheated death, tamed thunder, and made an entire city forget hunger on glorious afternoon. Yet you cannot stop. Fate clings like a searing plague. The arena is your temple, each race a prayer to sustain fortune. You invest in your chariot team, hire grooms, even train young drivers. Some call you Lord of the Chariots. The title sounds noble, yet you know full well, beneath the golden cheers, the truth still burns fiercely. Your empire rests upon racing wheels and terrified horses. At feasts, poets chant your name alongside Hercules and Achilles. You laugh aloud, but your heart trembles at the comparison. Rome's heroes never endure. They blaze brilliantly, then vanish. You know the day will come, whether by age, accident, or envy. The arena will reclaim all its gifts. Fortune gives generously, yet always collects her dues. Time hunts every charioteer, no matter how swiftly the steeds gallop. Your once minus powerful hands that commanded a squadron of steeds now tremble when gripping the reins. The cheers that once stirred your soul now sound distant, as if swallowed by the roar of memory. You tell yourself one more race and you'll retire, but the arena whispers in your ear, just one more race. The young charioteers are faster now. Those reckless youths, like you in your prime, race with death minus defying abandon. They call you the veteran, half in reverence, half in pity. You watch them train, and see your own ghost in their eyes, hungry, fearless, doomed to perish. The track remains unchanged. What has changed is you. The sands that once promised eternal life now lie in wait to swallow you whole. Yet each dawn, that craving stirs anew. You cannot resist the clatter of wheels, the thunder of hooves, the deadly allure of peril. So you fasten the reins to your waist one final time, stepping into the sunlight. The crowd erupts, not out of habit, but because they recognize you. You are legend, a living fossil of the golden age. The gates swing open. The warhorse surges forward. In that instant, you feel 20 again. Gales tear at your cloak. Sand stings your cheeks. Your pulse beats in sync with the hooves. Your grip on the steed strays beyond safety. Pride overrides reason. Behind you, opponent's chariot wheels scrape your axle. You feel the violent tremor, whisper of fate. Then heartbeat minus like stillness. Everything slows, sunlight and marble statues. Crowds breathless gasp. The instant before impact. You did not pray, only smiled. You always knew the circus would take you this way. When chariot and rider perish, the crowd's roar is not grief, but awe. They say the warhorse raced 3 more laps before stopping. The sand beneath, the tow-stained crimson. They wrapped your shattered body in the blue cloak of your faction and carried you from the arena, buried beneath a small monument outside the city walls. The inscription reads, "He raced with the gods, fell like a tempest, beyond the arena's clamor. You still gallop on, forever chasing the thunder cap." Long before pyramids pierced the sky, and temples echoed hymns to Ra, Egypt's true lifeline had already begun its work. The Nile. It is not merely a river, but the engineer of the world, carving life from barrenness. Arriving punctually each year, it surged forth from Africa's heart, bearing the abundant nourishment of distant rains, pouring its bounty upon Egypt's parched river valleys. The floodwaters brought fertile black silt. This miraculous gift spared Egypt from becoming a land of sand and dust. For the ancient Egyptians, the flood was not a natural phenomenon, but a sacred rhythm. They did not merely gaze upon the river. But listen to its pulse. The rising waters symbolized rebirth. The receding waters foretold harvest. From the poorest farmer to the supreme pharaoh, all life depended on this pulse. The entire calendar revolved around it. The three sacred seasons, aka Het flood season, Peret growing season, Shimu harvest season. The Nile was time itself, a living clock setting eternity's rhythm. Yet this river proved elusive. Some years it flooded wildly, submerging fields and villages. Other years it dried up, leaving famine minus ravaged wasteland. Faced with nature's capriciousness, the ancient Egyptians made a choice eternal to humanity. They learned to master the torrent, carving water minus level gauges into temple walls to measure depth, recording the river's moods, establishing a scientific system, refined through generations. They tamed the wild river into a precision instrument. As the floodwaters began to recede, people moved swiftly, digging canals and reservoirs to store the remaining flow. Every household participated in this annual ritual, transforming muddied floodwaters into order. The battle for survival evolved into the art of mastery. Egypt did not merely live by the Nile, but conquered it through engineering. Upon the shimmering river's surface, civilization reflected its own image. This river connected gods and mortals, priests and farmers, life and death. Its banks became a stage for human understanding, mastering nature not for domination, but for harmony. The Nile does not belong to Egypt. Egypt belongs to the Nile. For millennia it has shaped Egypt's destiny. When the Nile swells, Egypt holds its breath. The flood is both miracle and menace. This gift can swiftly turn to ruin. For centuries, survival depended on predicting the river's temper. Thus Egyptians became mathematicians, astronomers and engineers. Long before these words existed, their measure of the world was not stars or empires, but water. The priests of Heliopolis gazed upon the heavens, marking the annual rising of Sirius Soptede, harbinger of the flood. Its dawn appearance was no superstition, but heaven's signal that the Nile would surge. Villagers cheered at its sight, for it meant renewal of life. But predicting the flood was only the first step. The true test lay in mastering its torrent. Along the riverbanks, workers carved canals stretching for miles, channeling floodwaters into reservoirs and channels. With wooden shovels and stone picks as their tools, they carved Egypt's earliest irrigation arteries. Engineers divided the land into fields, bound by low earthen embankments, that both held back the floodwaters and allowed water to seep slowly into the soil. When the flood receded, it left behind the perfect moisture for planting barley, flax, and wheat. This was no chaos, but the art of geometry. Fieldworm meticulously surveyed and demonstrated, each plot mapped and taxed according to its fertility. After the floodwaters receded, surveyors known as rope miners cullers traversed the land, recalibrated boundaries eroded by the torrent. Their ropes were not merely tools, but the very prototype of mathematics itself. Yet nature never fully submitted to man. When the river failed to rise, drought consumed all. When the flood rose too high, entire villages vanished beneath the surging waves. To tame the torrent, Egyptians built embankments on levees, even constructing small dams with stones and earth. These projects demanded not only physical strength, but unity, a society capable of mobilizing tens of thousands at a single command. The Nile was not merely a source of sustenance. It was a crucible for organizational skill and labor wisdom. It demanded constant vigilance, exchanging discipline for reward. Through generations, Egyptians mastered the art of water to learn the path of collaboration. When the river flowed obediently, it imparted eternal wisdom to its people's. Civilization is not built through conquest, but through rhythm, mastering its patterns by yielding to the flood, not fighting it. For the ancient Egyptians, time itself flowed from the Nile. The river's pulse shaped the calendar, rituals, and very emotions of their civilization. While other civilizations marked time by royal succession or war, Egyptians measured existence by the river's ebb and flow. Each year was a cycle of death, rebirth, and harvest. This grand drama unfolded not in temples or palaces, but in the river's surging currents. Egyptians divided the year into three great seasons: the flood season, when waters engulfed the fields; the growing season, when crops sprouted from black silt; the harvest season, when the earth returned the promised fruits to the Nile. Each season lasted for months, with 30 days plus several sacred days, both to appease the gods and to balance cosmic order. Rhythms precise as mathematical formulas, yet imbued with profound spiritual meaning. As dawn approached, hot Sirius rises over the eastern horizon, heralding the dawn of Akhet. Priests at riverside temples watch the stars with sacred precision, convinced this brilliant harbinger is the flood goddess herself, whose radiance awakens the slumbering Nile. This marks Egypt's first astronomical prediction, a cosmic calendar uniting heaven, earth, and water. Every village held rituals to welcome the flood. Farmers sang hymns to Happy, god of the Nile, offering bread and beer. They prayed for a flood just right, neither too low to cause famine, nor too high to drown their homes. The flood's arrival was not merely anticipated, but celebrated with the solemnity of a divine homecoming. The flood calendar endowed Egyptians with a quality absent in other early civilizations: predictability. They precisely mastered sowing seasons, harvest timing, and grain storage cycles. The Nile transformed chaos into order, converted nature into a schedule, and elevated survival into tradition. Time, once wild and unpredictable, now flowed with the precision of a water clock. In the world beyond Egypt, the changing seasons brought fear, yet the people along the Nile met the future with serene composure. They did not resist the river's pulse, but lived in harmony with its rhythm. Within the steady heartbeat of the Nile, they found eternity, measured not by years or rainfall, but by the flood itself. The Egyptians did not merely await the Nile, they shaped it into form. Each canal, reservoir, and dam forms a warp thread in this vast tapestry of man-made landscapes. Early pharaohs understood: he who controls the water controls the kingdom. The flow of power rushed through canals and embankments as it circulated between throne and crown. The first canal builders were pioneers wielding iron shovels. With rudimentary tools, wooden plows, bamboo baskets, and bronze shovels, they diverted rivers and carved waterways through the desert like human veins. These canals transformed unpredictable floods into predictable harvests, and channeled water to fields miles from the main riverbanks. Each project freed Egypt from the Nile's whims, and gradually mastered its rhythms. By the Old Kingdom period, irrigation had become a national enterprise. Thousands of laborers worked under the supervision of engineers and scribes. Each reservoir was precisely measured and recorded. The canals were not merely practical, they held profound political significance. Pharaohs commanded the construction of new water networks, not only to feed their people, but to demonstrate divine authority. The godliness kings did not beseech the flood, they commanded the waters directly. One of the earliest great engineering feats was said to be the Bar-Uf Canal, whether myth or historical fact. This canal diverted Nile waters into the Ephraim Valley, transforming the barren basin into Egypt's oldest cultivated farmland. Centuries later, it still nourished villages, standing as a living fossil of ancient hydraulics. Even desert towns were governed by water flow. Irrigation reshaped their economies and allegiances. A dried-up canal could devastate entire regions, while timely water diversions sparked new settlements. Water became currency, and the pharaohs its bankers. Scribes etched measurements onto papyrus and temple walls, recording every drop. Yet canals also bound Egypt as a whole, becoming trade arteries, transporting goods, ideas, and people across distant lands. The river nourishing southern wheat also carried granite for northern pyramids. The Nile's network stitched the nation together. Each waterway proclaimed human nature collaboration, not conquest. Egypt's greatness stemmed not from conquests or gold. It flows quietly through irrigation channels where sweat and engineering transforms survival into civilization. Behind every monument, every harvest, every sluice gate, stands a silent legion of miners, engineers, surveyors, and scribes who tamed the river's flow into order. They weren't either poets nor warriors, yet they bore Egypt's entire blessing. Without them, the Nile's bounty would have drowned the land in flood or trapped it in famine. Because of them, this land became the most fertile river valley on earth. The shad, this simple counterweight lever device, was one of their earliest achievements. With this device, a single farmer could hoist buckets from canals to fields and irrigate crops by hand after floods receded. Later, ox miners driven water wheels called socky multiplied efficiency. The original manual labor evolved into mechanical rhythm. Egypt's earliest machinery was born of necessity, not luxury. But true genius belonged to the surveyors known as rope measurers. Each time the floodwaters receded and boundaries vanished beneath the silt, they traversed the fields with knotted ropes in hand, reminisce, measuring the borders. This was no mere guesswork, but geometry, angles, distances, and proportions formed the empire's foundation. Their accumulated knowledge not only shaped the fields, but laid the groundwork for temples and tombs. Water levels dictated symmetry. Symmetry gave birth to civilization. Then came the scribes, chroniclers of the flood. They tracked water levels with Nile gauges. Stone pillars marked with scales stood in temples like the gods Hathor and Ptah. These sacred measuring tools transformed natural phenomena into data. When waters rose beyond expectation, they warned the farmers. When waters fell too low, they prepared for famine. Priests interpreted these numbers as divine oracles, but engineers knew the truth. They were merely reading the river's pulse. Even pharaohs depended on these calculations. A single flood prediction error meant not just famine, but potentially sparked revolt. Engineers were guardians of stability. Their successes left no trace. Their failures brought catastrophe. Though they wore no crown, they upheld the kingdom's foundations. Every stone of the pyramids, every loaf in the craftsman's hands, begins with their precise measurements. They bridge the gap between gods and mortals, seeking balance between chaos and order. Their mathematical system flows downstream, merging into the fabric of Egyptian civilization. In this world ruled by divine order, they are silent priests of precision. They are not architects building temples, but creators of life. To the ancient Egyptians, the Nile was not merely a river, but a living deity. Its floods were the god's moods, its rapids, sacred utterances. They called it the god of joy, bestower of abundance, ruler of fish and grain. That deity clad in azure skin, whose essence flows through Egypt's very veins. Each drop of water is his bounty, each drought his silent decree. When the annual flood arrived, priests performed rites upon the riverbank. Bread, beer, and flowers drifted downstream, seeking to please the god of joy, to entice his bountiful gifts. In the temple of Thoth and Memphis, hymns are sung not to conquerors or kings, but to the river that nourishes all. You irrigate the fields, they chant. You give life to all things. You are the god of bread. The flood is not chaos, but the sacred order of flow. It proves that Mot, goddess of cosmic balance, still rules the world. If the water rises too high or falls too low, it is a warning that harmony is broken. As Mot's earthly incarnation, the pharaoh bears the sacred duty to maintain equilibrium. When the Nile fails, the pharaoh's rule loses legitimacy. This river is not merely water, but an intertwining of politics, theology, and prophecy. Yet the Egyptians' reverence for the Nile differs from foreigners' fear of deities. They worship it with affection, even tender respect, depicting the river god as genderless yet androgynous, plump and rounded, with a broad bosom. It symbolizes non-lineous, violent abundance, creation without conquest. Death, too, was bound to its bounty. When the floodwaters receded, the fertile black silt left behind was called K. He met the black land. Egypt's ancient name itself sprang from this. The festival of the flood's arrival was like the dawn of a new year. Children danced in the streets. Farmers sang as they built embankments. Priests proclaimed the flood's rise with drums and incense. During these precious weeks, Egypt was united not by rulers or wars, but by the water itself. The Nile's pulse was not merely about agriculture. It was the very foundation of the spirit. Each rise and fall was the heartbeat of the divine body, and through this deity, Egypt attained eternal life. Empires rose and fell, but whenever the flood returned, life and faith would begin anew. Each midsummer, when the Nile floods across Egyptian lands, it brings a silent gift, fine black silt. To the Egyptians, this was no ordinary soil, but the river god's whisper, the very language of the Creator. As the floodwaters receded, a thin layer of shimmering life, minus giving nourishment, remained, imbued with mineral essences from distant southern mountains. This black earth kemet stands as the watershed between harvest and famine, civilization and desert. Farmers discern its texture by touch alone. A handful of Nile silt, smooth and profound, holds greater value than gold. It nurtures wheat, barley, flax, papyrus, the foundation nourishing all life and empires. Every farmhouse marks its fields with water minus filled earthen ridges. After the flood recedes, cattle plow the moist fields. Farmers sow seeds into gleaming soil. Within weeks, the earth burst with vibrant green. This rhythmic miracle seems like divine intervention. Scribes record harvests year by year, charting floodwater levels. From these notes, patterns emerge. Shallow floods yield meager crops. Grain prices would rise. Abundant floods meant bountiful crops. And stable prices. Over centuries, this silent observation evolved into science. Egyptian farmers did not merely sow seeds. They also predicted harvests. They learned to listen to the language of silt, interpreting its weight, color, and flow patterns. Soil texture even shaped Egypt's urban layout. Villages built on high ground to avoid floods. Fields stretching like ribbons along riverbanks. This slender green valley, embraced by desert, cultivates a sense of focused civilization, perfectly balanced between chaos and order. Each year, the Nile erases and redraws the landscape, compelling Egyptians to adapt, rebuild, and remember. In a sense, the flood wrote history. Temples and tombs were built of limestone, but the foundation of Egypt's story was mud-moist, black, eternal. Even the pigments for murals come from the same silt that nourishes crops. The Nile not only sustains Egypt, it also paints it. When foreigners witness the river's bounty, they invariably envy this magic. Yet for Egyptians, there is no supernatural for such work. This is a partnership, not a miracle. The Nile gave, they listened. The silt was the god's handwriting. Year after year, the Egyptians fluently deciphered it. Mastering the Nile's bounty required not only reverence, but precision. The Egyptians transformed worship into engineering, remaking natural floods into a controllable system of abundance. Primitive canals evolved into a hydraulic network stretching from the delta to Nubia. Within this living cycle, each reservoir, dam, and canal played a vital role in Egypt's survival equation. At its heart were the floodplain's vast rectangular enclosures surrounded by earthen levees. As the floodwaters rose, canals channeled water into these reservoirs in a precise sequence. The floodwaters lingered for weeks, saturating the soil, before draining into the next field. This process mimicked the river's natural flow, yet controlled by humans. The result was fertile land under human command, a by on a crane minus enactment of the Nile's pulse. Water lifting became the next challenge. The shad UFA balanced lever, with the bucket suspended at one end and a counterweight at the other, revolutionized irrigation. With it, a single farmer could hoist hundreds of liters of water daily from the canal to elevated terraces. Later developed Sokia, employed ox-driven wooden wheels, whose buckets drew and poured water in ceaseless rhythm. These devices, though rudimentary, were ingenious, powered by muscle and geometry, not magic. Each flood season demanded nationwide coordination. Laborers built dams and dredged channels under provincial governors' orders. Governors reported to the royal engineer in Memphis. Pharaoh's decrees flowed downstream like the river itself. ensuring every riverside village contributed to the water system's equilibrium. A breach in one dam could spell disaster for another hundreds of miles away. Even temples integrated into this system, priests measured water levels using vertical gauges engraved with ancient Egyptian units, predicting next year's harvest, taxes, and the empire's stability. Science, religion, and politics converged here. The Nile's machinery was not forged from bronze or stone, but built by human hands. Tens of thousands of laborers worked in rhythm with the river's pulse. Egypt's true miracle was not the pyramids or the Sphinx, but this invisible infrastructure, a civilization that did not fight nature, but lived in harmony with it. The flood is eternal, but so is humanity's wisdom in mastering it. Pharaoh's pass. Temples are buried by sand, yet the Nile keeps its rhythm. The floodwaters of Ramses' era, bearing papiers, boats, and golden barges, still rise and fall centuries later. Farmers gazed upon it, though they no longer knew the gods' names. They still depended on the river's mercy. Egypt's monuments crumbled and eroded, but its greatest creation, the art of harnessing water, never ceased to function. The techniques that once fed the pyramid builders became templates for later civilizations. Greek engineers studied Egyptian canals. Roman surveyors borrowed their measuring techniques. Medieval farmers along the Mediterranean coast adopted water wheels and sluice gates almost unchanged. Even the measurement concept behind the term nemesis endured, though scales had long evolved from ancient Egyptian cubits. Egypt elevated the simple act of irrigation to a science. The world never forgot this wisdom. Yet the Nile's power remained a double-edged sword. Over regulation dried the river, letting it run wild, plunged the land back into chaos. Later rulers attempted to harness the Nile by replacing divine authority with bureaucratic systems. Yet the balance remained precarious. Centuries later, the British constructed dams to regulate floods, continuing a dialogue begun millennia earlier with mud baskets and stone embankments. Even today, Cairo engineers studying satellite data and water flow, they remain heirs to those ancient surveyors who measured with ropes and stars. The Nile's true legacy lies not in monuments or myths, but in a way of thinking. Egyptians long ago understood conquering nature requires not force, but rhythm. They did not view floods as enemies, but as partners in understanding. Their success lay not in subjugation, but in continuity, keeping life flowing year after year, generation after generation. Every civilization dreams of eternity. The Egyptians quietly achieved it through water. Today, the patterns of canals, fields, and villages seen from the sky mirror the scenes etched on tomb walls 3 millennia ago. The Nile still surges northward, still etches its mark in silt and shadow, still whispers its ancient promise: follow my rhythm, and I shall grant you eternity. Ultimately, Egypt's greatest monument is not carved in stone, but built by the river itself.